Good evening and welcome to the PBSL's first Diversity, Equality and Inclusion session. Tonight I'm delighted to be joined by Liseli Sitali, who's one of our PBSL board members and founder of the In Her Corner podcast, and also Rishi Jain, who leads up DE&I at Manchester United and has just been recognised as one of the leading practitioners in the country, I believe, Rishi. I will be handing over to Liseli, who will be hosting this evening. If you've got any questions, please use the chat function. The panel are very happy to answer any questions as you fire them through. So if there's any issues you want to raise, please go ahead. Liseli, over to you.
That's great. Thank you very much, Tom, and welcome everyone. Really appreciate you guys taking some time to spend with us this afternoon. I'm also incredibly excited, as Tom alluded to be speaking to Rishi, who is somebody who has worked in this space for quite some time before it's become sort of a hot topic. So I thought, what better way than to learn from those people who've had a 4-year head start at one of the world's biggest football clubs and sports fans. So Rishi, thank you very much for joining us. How are you?
Really well, thank you, and thank you for having me.
No, absolute pleasure, absolute pleasure. And just, you know, what I want to try and do today is kind of go through this, talking a bit more about you and what sort of motivates your work, and then going into the bones of actually what does diversity, equality or equity inclusion work look like at a club like Man United, and what put you on the journey that you have in order to enact some of the really key programs that you guys have managed to galvanize to sort of act a bit like a case study for everybody on the call today, so that they can kind of get a practical learning, because I'm aware that there's people here from different factions and they are also looking at this as a real hot topic. So yeah. So without further ado, if we could just pop up, we've got a deck that I've pulled together to just help frame the session. And we are happy to circulate this afterwards, so don't feel like you have to take any notes, everyone. I want you to fully enjoy, because Rishi has a lot of wisdom that you need to really focus and drink in. So make sure that you use your time for that, and afterwards we can do a follow-up. And as Tom said at the beginning, please don't be shy. Pop any questions and comments down there. I'll be keeping an eye on the chat as Rishi talks through his work and experience. So Tom, if you could please pop the presentation up, that'd be amazing. So yeah, so as I mentioned, this is about reviewing and looking at how Manchester United's program of work, which is called All Red, All Equal, helps to reaffirm and sort of visualize the club's commitment to diversity, equality and inclusion, which very much sits in Rishi's remit. So what I want to do is get to know Rishi a little bit better now, because I think I'm always really curious when I meet people who work in a DEI space. I always wonder what motivates them, what is their why, because they're doing work that sits at a real intersectionality between strategy and the sort of human piece. So if we go on to the next slide, and we'll just get the man himself to start giving us a deep dive. So
I don't really have any words to say.
That's disgusting.
I can't believe somebody said that.
Football is going through a time
where we're still seeing discrimination
throughout our game.
It's just crazy that we are speaking about these things still today.
I'm shocked.
I've played football the majority of my life and I ain't heard anything as ridiculous as that.
There's no place for that anywhere.
Nobody asked that question in reality, right?
It's ignorant.
I've heard that a million times before.
That's just wrong.
I don't even know where to start with that.
There's no way.
Vous plaisantez?
I can't find the right word in English.
Il faut arrêter ça.
Non acredito.
I don't even know what to say to that.
Really?
Really? Really?
There should never be racism in the world.
It's just nonsense.
It's just now reminded.
Embrace difference.
At the end of the day, we're just all the same. All red, all equal.
It's Manchester United's promise.
To champion equality,
Diversity and inclusion.
To celebrate individualism,
Accepting people for who they are.
Embracing the differences.
That make the world
a more exciting place.
There's no greater goal.
That a more equal world.
All red.
All equal.
So yeah, Richie, before we dive into talking a little bit more about that powerful film and what led you to that, I want to just spend some time now talking a little bit about you. So if we go back, yeah, so everyone, so Rishi Jain, your official title is Equality and Inclusion Manager at Manchester United. So you started off at Liverpool. So do you want to tell us a little bit about what led you from Liverpool to where you are now?
Yes, so thank you, Liseli. I'm Manchester United Equality and Inclusion Manager, so I manage everything that we do around diversity and inclusion, diversity, equality and inclusion, however you want to cut it, internally and externally. There are people processes, our culture, our networks, how we operate, our governance processes, essentially how we embed D&I into every decision that we make and everything that we do. Externally, you've had a snippet into some of the fantastic work that we've been able to achieve around campaigning and advocacy, how we can position ourselves as one of the biggest football clubs in the world, and essentially, sounds a little bit cheesy, but make the world a better place. Use the power of the brand that we have in order to be able to do that, and the global fan base that we have as well. Prior to my role at Manchester United, I worked to Kick It Out, Football to Equality and Inclusion campaign, working with the 72 Football League clubs, which was a fantastic experience. And as Liseli said, I started my career at Liverpool Football Club, working as a volunteer. So that was really nice, actually. It was working with local communities, local diverse communities within the city as a football coach. Was lucky enough to progress into different roles in the club, working within the comms team and the HR team, but essentially always had this equality focus throughout everything that I've done. So yeah, that's my career in a nutshell.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I also want to later on talk a little bit more about Kicking Out and sort of how that shapes and informs your work in the space you're in. But just going back there to obviously you starting in this space, started from a volunteer position at Liverpool. And I guess we have to talk about it, Rishi. I know you didn't want to, but what some of you might have picked up from Rishi's accent, he's from Liverpool and he's actually a Liverpool fan. And I find this dichotomy really interesting because obviously he occupies this really great role Man United where he's helping them expand and grow through a really powerful platform, but you're of course a Liverpool fan. How do you square those two things, just out of interest?
Interestingly, but to be honest, you know what, it's great. It's a fantastic icebreaker. It's a fantastic talking point. At the end of the day, regardless of who I'm working with, whether it's supporters, stakeholders, partners, our people, there's a passion there for football and wanting to do more. To be able to do that as a Scouser, as a Liverpool fan, is great. You work for one of the greatest clubs in the world. You're able to make a difference straight away, and to be able to do that as a Liverpool fan makes no difference really. It's fantastic to be able to do it.
Yeah, I love the PR answer. Very good. And I did you not rub it in then when you finally won the title? Were you quite gracious and humble about it?
I think, to be honest, people might have been happy that we were working from home at that time. I don't know. You need to ask them, not me. But a few people always say that it's a great diversity message that you've got a Liverpool fan and a Scouser looking after equality. So maybe that's the way to do it.
Yeah, no, definitely. I definitely think so. And going back to your time, obviously, so very much at the beginning. So what motivated you to take on that volunteer role around community integration? Because that's something Liverpool have also become really famed for, and there's a real pride around the club, that piece. So what was it that galvanized you to take that?
I was really lucky. I actually started working at Liverpool as part of my Duke of Edinburgh volunteer placement, which a lot of people do. They do something, and it was a 2-week placement, and at the end of it, it was like, well, do you want to stay on? I was like, oh yeah, might as well. And then I was there at the club for a total of 9.5 years, and they were fantastic. It was a coaching position at the age of 14. Used to get changed on the back of the bus after school, and it was putting cones out, washing bibs, organising things. But it was really nice and really enjoyed it. But what was great for me, and what really sort of led to my passion around D&I, to be really honest, is when I moved over to the social inclusion program. So once I turned 16, I was lucky enough to be sort of rewarded for my time in terms of pay. But once I started university, I moved over to the social inclusion team. And that was really nice. Liverpool's a diverse city, but it's very localised in terms of that diversity. It's high in certain areas and not so high in others. And I was used to working in those not so other areas. To be able to work with the diverse communities across the city was fantastic. You're working with people who look like me, who thought like me, but also of quite a similar age. I was 18 at the time. And it was great just to be able to bring these people together, but also to just see people who thought like me. And that's something that I'm always really passionate about, is how does this relate to, yes, we've got partners to appease, we've got senior leaders, we've got fans, but how does this land in our local communities? Because they're the ones who are the future.
Yeah, no, totally. And also a lot of the bedrock of football clubs, right, were born in communities. So it's only right that as a give back, football clubs are laser focused on what they're adding to those people's lives.
Yeah, very much so. I think you see all the Premier League clubs, the majority of the Football League clubs have a fantastic community scheme. I was lucky enough to be sort of really embedded within Liverpool's and really sort of earn my stripes within that. And now, as I'm working at the level that I am now, working a lot more strategically and a lot more high level things, that's fantastic to do. But I always look back at my roots and think, how does this land? What does this mean? How can I support Manchester United Foundation? How can we support the communities that we serve? At the end of the day, Manchester United, we have a responsibility to work with our local communities, and we do some fantastic stuff. And diversity, equality, inclusion, it really does go hand in glove with that.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think also what a testament to that community engagement program was at Liverpool was that it then brought you through, right? You were able to then have a clear career path through volunteering, then eventually taking on a formalized role, which then set you up to kick it out. And so how did you make that transition from Liverpool to Kick It Out?
The kick out job was a really interesting one. I think I was at a time where 9.5 years at the club at Liverpool, had grown up there. I'd literally grown up there from the age of 14. And I think as I wanted to progress, as I passed through university, I wanted to be able to be in a role where I could make a difference. And I've got some fantastic friends and colleagues who still work there now. That's where my wife's from. She works there now still, so I've still got all those contacts and I'm really lucky to but I was in a position where I thought, if I really want to kick on and really want to make a difference, maybe I need to do it elsewhere. And I think I'm really glad that I did. To be totally honest, the work at Kick It Out, it's a small organisation, but with a big impact. I worked with 72 Football League clubs, essentially an equality account manager across those. So you're working with organisations who have 5 members of full-time staff, but we still need to adapt equality into their everyday, or organisations who may have 400 or 500 members of staff and their focus is very much get to the Premier League.
Yeah.
They all look at equality in different ways, they look at D&I in different ways, and they all have different drivers around that. Some are financial, some are for the right reasons, for moral, but at the end of the day, it's good for business. It works for business, you can drive it forward. So yeah, it was a really interesting role to have.
Yeah, definitely. And that business argument is something that seems to be, really pertinent for a lot of people. And, I was lucky enough a couple of weeks ago, and I see her on the call to speak to Sarah Brooks, who's the Chief People Officer at Formula E. Welcome. Thank you. And we had a really great conversation about that and how that shapes and molds how organizations set up. So what was sort of the key learnings that you got from working in Kick It Out that have helped set you up for the success you are having at Man United now?
For me, it's the ability to implement and embed D&I into what I'd like to think is any setting. I touched on it earlier. You've got small organisations, large organisations, small organisations who think they're large but they're not, vice versa. And what I'd like to say is that I'm able to sort of adapt and try and understand people's drivers around, because I think that's a really important thing for anyone who's looking to embed D&I into their everyday. There is always a box that you can tick. That's a really bad phrase to use around D&I, but probably the best way.
We'll edit that out. Don't worry, Rishi.
To be honest though, it's true. You can always you can always take a box for someone. They might be the most commercially driven person in the world and be all about the pounds and pence and the bonus. D&I enhances what they do. It might be someone who's really sort of altruistic or really driven on their morals. D&I will enhance what they do. It works really well. And that's one of the skill sets which I think really does lead to success in this role.
Yeah, no, definitely. And just one of the other questions that's sort of been asked about, how you obviously have informed your work has been from Emma O'Connor, who's asking if there were any courses or qualifications along the way that you've done that have helped to give you that mindset to be able to, be able to pivot and appeal and make cases for helping people around the business get involved.
To be honest, it's a question that gets asked a lot, and I've always got a really poor answer because it's no. I haven't really looked back and done that qualification, and a lot of sort of D&I professionals in corporates outside the sport, they have the HR, CIPD. My view on that is potentially a little bit controversial, the fact that it's not just always about your internal people, it's about the bigger picture. I'm quite lucky to have a lot of lived experience in this topic. I've worked in football my entire career and like to think I'm able to apply that to not just the sports industry, but to wider business as well. The people looking at courses, there are a huge amount of leadership courses around inclusive leadership. CMI doing some really good stuff. Trust Management Institute. There obviously is the CIPD and the modules, but I think for me, it's how can you apply your everyday D&I into your everyday and sort of pull on those passions that people obviously have, the people who've joined the conversation.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think that's such a good point, because what you're doing is lived experience. Nothing can beat a lived experience, because a lot of the inequalities and inequities you're addressing are things people have lived for a long time, and there's not a formalized, structured course that kind of says, let's tick all these boxes and it means we will solve the prejudice people feel around, you know, same-sex relationships, around certain religious groups they belong to, or racial groups. So I think that is a very key takeaway. So hopefully that helped answer your question, Emma. And Ian Braid has asked, does your role include people with a disability, and how are they embraced and included if so? So later on, we're going to actually dive into that, Ian, a little bit more with some work. So we will hopefully answer that question, but I'll answer with a short yes. And then later on, Rishi will fill it with more eloquence of examples around that. So we'll dive on to the next slide now so we can keep going. So yeah, so what we're going to look at is how it started. So how did the journey at Manchester United start? Obviously, you now have this great sort of standard beacon that you are now in the Premier League for people and other people. The Premier League essentially holding you guys up as being the best practice, example of best practice in terms of the impact you've had, not only within your club, but also externally, which I think is very important given the power of Man United's brand and reach as well. So I think what I want to do now is spend some time with you just to talk about how did you set up. So if we can go to the next slide. So what we wanted to understand, first of all, is just kind of touching on your lived experiences there to then set you up now at Man United. When we first connected to start to talk about this, you told me that your main why was driven by the core of it was the right thing to do, but you also saw it as a real way in to kind of mobilizing and accelerating a business's performance. And I think this is how people need to start to think about DI, almost like as a change management program to help set people up for success internally. So I want you to just talk a little bit about how you realize those ambitions of being a disruptor, agitator, and innovator through the work and role you're doing now.
So it's a good point. I remember that conversation well, and it was an interesting one. I suppose I made a conscious decision to be that person as such. I think in my early career, I was very sort of finding my feet, as we all do with age and experience. You're a little bit quieter, you don't want to challenge too much. But as my own confidence grew and as my knowledge grew, and we started to achieve some things at my days at Liverpool and at Kick Out, I was very much thinking, you know what, maybe it is about being stronger, maybe it is about being more confident. So when I joined Manchester United, it was fantastic because from day one, I've been empowered to be able to really lead the club in terms of what we do around D&I. I've got some fantastic advocates, allies, friends, colleagues across the business who really drive us forward with me side by side. That's fantastic. And I've got a fantastic senior leadership team who guide me through that and provide me the support to be able to do that. I think with this role and with the world in its current state, you need a disruptor and agitator to drive forward change. You called it a change management program. I'd have to agree with that. Diversity and inclusion, it is a change management program because it's about changing your people, and that's not necessarily physically changing them. It's about changing mindsets. It's about addressing biases. It's about addressing issues. But sometimes it is actually just about changing people.
Yeah.
It's about getting the right people in and adding diversity, because you can quote McKinsey stats all day and talk about the fact that diverse workforce equals more productive workforce, etc. But that's not why you do it. That's a fantastic byproduct, but it's an ever increasingly important byproduct. The fact that a more diverse workforce does make you a better workforce. Do you really want to be surrounded by 10, 15 colleagues who are all thinking the same thing? For me, some might be seen as a difficult person, but I'm always very much like, you know what, can we think of this in a different way? How can I put my shoes in my feet in someone else's shoes? Do it that way. So earlier when I talked about lived experiences, they're not all my lived experiences, but I'd like to think that you can relate to others and empower people around you to talk about theirs. Because I think that's where you'll really make a difference. Start to think about how do other people think and how will this be received by the communities that aren't represented around this table, because that's more important than the ones that are.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think also back to, I just want to sort of track back to two key points that you've made there. One about how just being driven purely by the transactional won't get you where you want to get to, right? So if we purely look at it as this is going to improve our bottom line, that is going to be a limited form of change management, right? Because there's only so far the money argument takes you. And then the other side of things is if you don't have people who are fully bought into it as well, that also won't allow you to have that transformational change that you need in order to then achieve those big goals. So my sort of question to you to say, how did you guys, you coming into that role, right? You started in 2016. How did you start to identify those tracks? Because there'll be a lot of people, now where a lot of organizations have newly created your job role. What advice would you give them to navigate that and understand which way to lean in, the transformational or the transactional argument? Because I think it's a tricky balance to get, right?
Yeah, you're right. It's a tricky balance, but it's such an important balance. I think to give you a bit of an insight, I started the role August 2016 at Manchester United and spent the first 4 to 6 weeks looking at policies, looking at paperwork, making sure that our foundations were strong. Mm-hmm. I was coming into an organisation which was very committed to equality, and it really knew what equality meant, but a lot of that was driven through its foundation, which is fine. That's brilliant. It's a really strong starting point to be very community focused, and the club has a fantastic history of equality and being inclusive. But I really took the time to engage with our senior leaders. As I said, from day one, I was really empowered to be able to do that, build these fantastic relationships with them, both sort of personally, professionally, to understand their drivers, like what makes them tick, like why is D&I important to them professionally, but also why is it important to them personally?
Yeah.
Start to understand that about your people, about the key influencers and the key decision makers. That's where you start to really find that balance. If you've got your business people who are all thinking this adds so much weight to the business side of what I do, but at the end of the day, it's the right thing to do. And once you get those to go hand in hand, the sky's the limit. You can literally do absolutely anything and everything that you want to.
I see. And I think that's such a good point as well about the space that leadership makes, right? Because a lot of this kind of where you see this falling by the wayside, personally for me, is I'm observing organizations where they kind of hand it over to the employees to drive forward without having that buy-in and that accountability from senior leaders. So was that something that was set up already for you at Man United, in that sense that the leadership team generally made themselves accessible and accountable for it? Or is it something that you had to instill in them as a way of working?
They were accessible, but I think a lot of it was sort of waiting for the person to come into the role. I'm quite lucky that I'm that person to be able to do that.
Yeah.
One of the things that we have done and that I brought in quite early on as well was a really strong sort of governance structure around it. So everything I say and everything I do, it's driven on passion. Hopefully you can see that in the way that I talk. It's D&I's with passion and it comes across. Yeah. But also it was important to have a really strong structure around that, because yes, passion can make you go a really long way, but at the same time, if I step out to that, you need to know it's going to continue, that it's strong and there's a structure there. Yeah. So having an equality committee, which is essentially our senior leaders, they'll meet quarterly and make key decisions around D&I, and that's fantastic because that's them taking professional responsibility.
Yeah.
But we have a number of committees across different sort of strands of the business, as most organisations do, but our equality committee really allows us to discuss really topical issues. So if you can imagine that sitting at the top of the organisation and reporting into our two most senior people. At the more operational level, there are 7 inclusion networks, which are very targeted towards our staff and to our people. And they were driven around me wanting to give staff a voice and a platform and opportunity to drive us forward. I mentioned earlier that I talk about lived experiences. I haven't lived every experience, no one has. There are always going to be strands of equality that we relate to more than others for whatever reason, and that's who we are as people. So my aim was to engage with our business and understand more about them, but also allow them to come up with ideas to drive us forward and change the way that we operate. And what's great there, you've got operational people pushing forward and you've got senior people working down towards the business, and straight away, actually everyone's pulling in the same direction.
Yeah.
And then you've got fantastic executive sponsors from that equality committee engaging with people who they may not have met before to talk about equality, which is the common ground for them, all driven on passion, all driven on self-nomination to be an executive sponsor. For example, our women's network, yes, we have a female executive sponsor, but we also have a male. Our ethnic diversity network, you'd naturally assume that our exec sponsor for that network is from a black and minority ethnic background, and he's not. Works in our football team, and he's not. And that's a self-nominated person who said, I want to do some really good work in this. I've got a really diverse team. I want to learn as well as show some of the learnings that I have. And that's where we've really had success, because you've got this corporate approach around D&I, but you've got these people who have taken it into their everyday and taken it as an additional responsibility and something that they see that enhances their everyday as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think that's such an important point you raise as well, about how it doesn't always have to be somebody who comes from an underrepresented group who steps into that role, because that's also, I feel like, a kind of, let's say, a backward mindset that people have around DEI in my personal view. Because if we look at how society is generally structured, so let's take the UK as an example, people who have the most social advantage, also economic power, tend to be people who are white and male. So when you're looking at trying to redress the balance of that, for me, it always seems as if it's best to get the person who has the most advantage to try and understand what disadvantage looks like and how they can use their more advantaged position to redress that, right? Because to try and get the person in a disadvantaged position to always be leading that work, you kind of hit against the wall where maybe that person at the top, they're like, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know why you think that you don't have an equal chance. You work here at Man United just like I do. So what are you talking about, you know?
Exactly, and it's that message of allyship across, and allyship is something which is predominantly used for LGBT plus work, and it's not, to be honest, it's applicable across everything around D&I. And you look at, for example, International Women's Day is a great example. A lot of people, there's this clamour for fantastic female speakers, and I think I've always thought, yeah, fantastic female speakers, that's what we always want, not just for International Women's Day, but for every day. Yeah. But let's get some fantastic men to talk as well about how they empower the teams around them and what they do and why they're advocates. And also, if someone who isn't maybe in tune with that message sees someone who looks like them, thinks like them, they may go, okay, if they get it, maybe I need to think a little bit more. Yeah. And it's very quickly start to change people's hearts and minds by doing that.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's that sort of peer reflection, right? That allows you to then have a pressure to change and do something that will affect it. Yeah, and I think on that point, I'd love to, if it's okay with you, to spend a little bit of time talking about Richard Arnold and the work he's done, you know, as a leadership figure at United, because I found this really interesting, and I think it's a great case study in itself, just to share about what that can look like in practice, that form of allyship.
Yeah, so Richard is our group managing director. He's responsible for how we operate as a business. He is also my biggest advocate and ally that I've probably ever worked with. He's a fantastic sort of person to work for and work with. He's been someone who's driven us forward, driven me forward sort of personally, professionally, to do more around D&I. And it's fantastic to have you pretty much your most senior person in the business who's got that time to really to learn more himself, but also to be a real passionate advocate around diversity and inclusion. He's been widely recognised for that, picked up a number of sort of external recognitions and awards, which is fantastic and something he truly deserves. The work that he's done. But it's also someone who is much more than the person that you copy in when you want someone to do something, not quite doing it. That never needs to happen, because people know that they take it seriously. That the business diversity and inclusion seriously. So I can't actually recall a time where I've had to do that to get something done, because people know it's on senior people's radar. It's never the approach that you want to take anyway, to be honest. Start copying people in and throwing your weight around, etc. But actually, when you're empowered by a senior leader and their direct team to make a change in the business, to disrupt, to agitate, to be innovative, you don't need that, because you're empowered by them, by the fact that they're not even there, because people see how much time they give up. They see how they talk about D&I in conversations with partners and earnings calls, publicly, on the website, across our channels. When you've got people actually proud to talk about diversity and inclusion and don't necessarily come from those underrepresented groups, that's when you really start to make a difference and make a change both internally and externally.
Yeah, no, definitely. It breeds a culture, right? Because what you then move from is just saying, this is something we do in this little box there that Rishi's in charge of, and we just leave that to him. But actually, this is something that we stand for as a club. And I think, you know, a good way of thinking about that is how for a long time, Man United has been a club that's prided itself on performing well on the pitch and being the best team in Europe and around the world. And that is everybody's responsibility in the club, right? And by embedding that same culture and that same approach to this, that's how you can then start to get that tangible, sort of authentic success.
Totally, and I think I was taking part in a session, I think it was this time last week actually, and I was asked a relatively similar question, and I think I answered it with sort of true measure to success is how much equality is talked about when I'm not in the room.
Yeah.
You know what? That's it in a nutshell. I don't need to be there anymore to talk for people to think about D&I. Yes, they may run things by me and check it with me, but more and more now our people, both senior, more operational, our middle managers, they'll say, this is the idea that we have, this is the work that we've done, what do you think? Yeah. Rather than me having to be there to say, well, have you thought about equality? Have you thought about this? And I suppose that's how far we've come as an organisation, but that's how far we've come as a society as well, to sort of embed D&I into the everyday considerations.
Yeah, no, definitely. And of those sort of everyday considerations has been this sort of groundswell this year because of various tragic things that have happened, but in particular around sort of social pressures around anti-racism movements has been advocacy for players and athletes in particular. Do you feel like the culture that you've created at Manchester United, just because he's on screen and I've got a question in the chat box related to it, is do you feel like that kind of culture helped to give the confidence to someone like Marcus Rashford to do the work that he is doing at the moment in campaigning to end child poverty? Do you think him being in that structure, obviously, I don't know if you've talked to him personally, but if you were to sort of surmise, would you say that being part of that culture also empowers other people like your athletes to be able to go out and do things that they truly care about because they see it in there every day and it's normal for them to do?
I'd like to think so. I'd like to think that not just Marcus, but all the players realise that they represent an organisation which really does believe in its values and empowers its players, its staff, its senior leaders, its supporters to challenge, but also to do the right thing. The work that Marcus has done is fantastic. I think for such a young man, 23 years old, we learn from him every day in terms of what he's done and the achievements that he's had, and he's had some fantastic recognition. I think he's only going to get even more, but what's quite nice is that he doesn't do it for the recognition. He does it for the right reasons and because it's really important to him, and it's really nice. And there's some fantastic work done by other players, and while Matt has got Common Goal, which is unbelievable. The work he's done and the lobbying and the leveraging that he's done with other athletes across not just football but across other sports.
Yeah.
Do that, and straight away you can look at individuals within the team who they'll empower the team around them, the players around them, to do more and be more supportive. So for someone like Marcus, it's fantastic to be able to say, there's your guiding light. There's someone who you want to, wow, if we could all be like Marcus, wouldn't the world be a better place? And it's someone you're actually really proud to represent and represent the same organisation.
Yeah, no, and I think that's such a good learning. And I was going to go on to ask you about One Matter, because he started the Common Goal thing a long time ago, and that whole idea and that whole galvanizing other athletes to also use their platform and power for social change was really a really powerful message that is great to see resonates now. And I think one of the things that has kind of come to the fore really also started in 2016. I quite like that there's quite a trajectory here between you and athlete activism and sports consciousness, because 2016 was the year that saw Colin Kaepernick start the Taking the Knee movement. And obviously the sort of very public confrontation that was had then with the former, happily soon to be former president of the United States, Donald Trump, and the NFL. And it was that really big public confrontation. But now taking a knee has become how players everywhere go out and represent. And we've got a question from the floor to say, in your opinion, do you think taking the knee is losing its impact? Or should it continue? And if so, not, how should we replace it? Or, how can you move that form of symbolic activism on?
You know what, I can answer that question slightly differently without my personal opinion. To be honest, I can answer it in a discussion giving insight into a discussion that I had with some colleagues, and we had the exact same debate.
Yeah.
And it was a really healthy discussion. It was in one of our networks, and it was like, does it still have purpose? Does it not? Is it important? Has it become part of the pre-match ritual? And then one of my colleagues, he cut across all the conversation, and we all had sort of went a bit quiet because he was like, well, yeah, he's right. He said, just because we see it every week, watching as much football as I consume, and whether it's United games, Liverpool games, pretty much anything that's on TV, for some people, maybe it has become part of the pre-match ritual, the same as the referee taking the ball off the plinth. However, if that's the first time someone's watching the game, or it's a young child who's walks past and goes to the parents or to whoever they're watching with, what's going on there when they see an image like Marcus taking the knee, then it's worth it.
Yeah.
It's 100% worth it, and you could do it all day, every day, if that's the difference that it makes. So I'm so supportive of the fact that the players, as a collective, not just for United but for all clubs, want to actually stand up and be counted against discrimination. It's fantastic to see that. The fact that they want to show this message of unity and solidarity for marginalised groups, for Black people, for mixed minority people, I think it's great. So for me, for some people it might become immune to it, but if that changes the mindset of one person, then for me, carry it on. It works perfectly.
Yeah, no, definitely. I agreed with that, because I think the other way around, I also say to people when they start to say, don't you think it's getting a bit old? It's a bit there. I would say to them, how about the poppies? Why don't we throw the poppies away? Because what do we actually do? And I know that's going to upset some people when they listen to that, but the reason I say it is we do it every year in November, but when else do we take a moment to actually support that Army veteran community who have fought and represented our country, apart from that one moment in November? But what that has done over time with us doing it over and over again is it's given it a place in our culture and a place in our society that we respect and revere and understand the importance of, because we do it as a repeated action and it's expected and it's given. And so I think some other way to think about taking the knee could be that, does it become the same as the poppy in terms of its significance in representing anti-racism?
Well, you know what? It's like Black History Month. You see companies, corporates, whoever, you see organizations change as well. Switch over their Twitter avatars, their LinkedIn images, etc. to mark Black History Month, and then 1st of November it's changed. End of Pride Month it's changed, and go, right, we'll see you again next year. The constant advocacy, the constant campaigning around taking the knee, Black Lives Matter, etc., sort of promoting sort of racial equality. It's fantastic that's happening all year round, because that's exactly when it should be happening. It should be this condensed period where we all go really big in October, and then we go, right, we're not doing it anymore because we've ticked the box, we've done it. Whereas in reality, you normalise that into your everyday, then you might become immune to it, but it's always in your mind. You're always thinking about it. And I think with everything that's happened this year around Black Lives Matter, around COVID, around political issues, it's needed now more than ever.
Yeah, no, definitely agreed. And what I want to do now, now we've kind of got this sort of macro world around what sits around DEI and powers your work, and to those intersections of what you want to do in the disruptive innovation space of moving a business on. I want to now just talk specifically about what does diversity and inclusion look like at Man United. So if we move to the next slide, and we're going to then go into a case study now where we're going to talk about also the work that you've been doing. So what I want to do is I want to start talking about the journey in stages, right? So I want to start with how you guys started out. You have this really great platform and campaign vehicle now called All Red, All Equal, which we watched a really powerful film at the beginning there with both your male and your female team, which was great to see as well, because that's something that when you first came in, you didn't have both a man and female team, but now you do, which is a great position to be in. But what was day one like? So let's go back to 4 years ago and say, what was day one like after you did all the policy reading, understanding, reaching out? What was the first point that you said, okay, we're going to go with All Red, All Equal, because, just so people can understand?
Well, after all that sort of groundwork, getting the foundations ready, it was very much around creating an identity, Liseli, around what does Manchester United stand for, what are our values, what are our beliefs. So that's why All Red All Equal, it resonated with our business, it works. There was a team of us who worked together to sort of come up with that. And yeah, it's great, it's a hashtag, it's a word, but very quickly it became a behaviour.
Yeah.
It was the same time we launched All Red All Equal, we launched our inclusion networks. So straight away you had this internal v external approach going side by side, taking different paths, but still very much complementing each other. And in the early days, All Red All Equal was it was quite a nice, clean message.
Yeah.
We have a promise, it's aspirational, it's about making the world a better place. There's no greater goal than a more equal world, which is a fantastic, obviously, sort of analogy for football.
Yeah.
You know what? It was very much just saying this is the real start of our journey. It was also about the club being able to take ownership of D&I. We're very driven by other organisations, some fantastic organisations doing great work, kick out Stonewall, Football v Homophobia. But I think for us to be able to really cut through and to engage with both our people and our supporters and our stakeholders, it was important for us to do it as Manchester United, and that's why All Red All Equal is really successful for us. There's been challenges throughout. It takes time. People are a bit like, oh, what's this? How does it work?
Yeah.
But also it was like one of the things with everything that we do is if we're going to do something, we do it right.
Yeah.
We're not just going to dip our toe in the water. And that's why it took a little bit of time to get to that. And that's also why I was very conscious of not coming out with a video, the hatred video, which you've seen already.
Yeah.
You do that first, and then someone goes, oh, so what do you do?
Yeah.
You don't sort of left it with empty pockets and be like, oh, well, we don't really do that much, but look at our great video.
Yeah.
We've seen that through Black Lives Matter. We've seen a huge amount of companies, organizations being held to account for their actions. They'll come out with a statement and then they'll go, oh, well, actually, you've done this. Or we'll go, oh, well, actually, we don't, this is our statement. And you can't just keep on pointing people at the same thing.
Yeah.
That was what was really good for All Red All Equal. It was a very nice message for us to say, this is us, we're on the map. However, we're building what we do. Huge amount of activity internally, externally, engaging with our community, empowering our people, doing things like launching our LGBT supporters group we've never had before. And that allowed us to sort of build in confidence.
Yeah.
And then when we did, 3.5 years later, start to talk a lot more meaningfully around equality, it was with the backing of our players, with our sponsors, with our people, with our supporters. And straight away, people were like, oh, well, this makes sense. You can see the journey where we've gone from this crisp, clean corporate message to like, you know what? Let's make a difference. Now let's really start to change hearts and minds. Let's really start to make the world a better place. Let's actually tell people what we truly believe in and also tell them what we expect them to believe in. And that's the sea change. But that was all coming from a position of confidence.
Yes.
I and people around me would never have felt confident being able to do that in the early days, because if you're going to point the finger, you need to look back at yourself and think, am I doing this genuinely and authentically?
Yeah.
And that's one of the things I always say is that if it's not genuine, if it's not authentic, there's no point doing it. Because it's real. You're doing it for a PR exercise. You're doing it because you want to be seen to do it rather than for the right reasons. And the success factors are fantastic. We've had a huge amount of external recognition, but for me, we've seen behavioural changes in the way that we do things. Our internal culture has sort of massively adapted to the way to do it. It's part of our performance review process. There's no Red All Equal principle in there, and that's great. But you know what? It's become part of our everyday. People say to me, oh, well, even in the more informal, oh, that's not very All Red All Equal, and it might be in the jokery, but I'm like, that's fantastic, because you know what it is? It's a behaviour. It's very much us. And then people start to think, oh, what should we think about with All Red All Equal with this new initiative? And 4 or 5 years ago, we would never have thought of that. We would never have connected the dots between the two, because we've been able to take our time with that. And it's led to some really fantastic work that we've been able to do.
Yeah, no, that's really great to hear, because it's that way, it's that difference between, you know, having a real purpose and intent, and that having this sort of patience and the actual investment and discipline and commitment to see it through, right? It's not saying I'm going to turn around tomorrow and I'm going to switch on a whole bunch of really beautiful film, do a whole bunch of gifting and those player ops for, you know, it must have been quite tempting because you have it there, right? And I always think it's also quite interesting for me, and I want to ask you to say, do you think that for a really long time, football as a sport, because it's always had diversity in terms of on the surface, right? On the pitch, you get players from different nationalities, different countries, things. Do you think that's what's held us back in sport in some ways, in being able to confront making those big changes through how people behave and think about a business? Because we think externally, actually, it looks as if things are okay because we've got everyone from every different place. But actually, what are we doing around the belonging and inclusion piece? Because people often forget that you can have diversity without inclusion and belonging, right? And that's what a value system addresses.
Yeah, I partly agree with that. I think there's a real sort of lack of visibility into what the football workforce really looks like.
Mm-hmm.
People focus on those 18 players on the pitch,
yeah,
like the manager, the coaches, the execs, etc. Whereas you look, it's actually the team behind the team as such as where you get you really true insight into what an organisation is like. Football, first teams, academies are always the most diverse group of any organisation, any football club, and that's fantastic. It's the best league in the world, best teams in the world. That's exactly what you want to see. That much diversity, but I suppose, yeah, the workforce side of things, the belonging side, has been slightly behind, but you're starting to see some really meaningful initiatives now across it. The FA have just launched the Football Leadership Diversity Code as part of that, and that's the first piece that really looks at how we can diversify our senior leadership team and team operations across Black and mixed ethnic people and also female, and that's great. And you know what, I talk about confidence and ability. What was great is that launched, we signed up to it, and that's fantastic. But what we thought, you know what, we can go bigger and better. So we've applied those principles to all recruitment across our entire business. And we've also said, you know what, we've got a strategy in this area. We're also going to add LGBT and disability because that's what's right for us. That's where our underrepresentation is. That's where we want to do more work. And I talk back about being in a position of confidence. That's it in a nutshell. You can actually use the approach and the sort of the time that we took to be in the right place to actually say yes to things, but say yes to things on our terms and say we're going to make it bigger and better. But also at the same time, you can also say no to things. You can say that to the initiative, but that's not quite right for us. We wish you the very best to look. Let's have another conversation in 12 months' time. Things might have changed. And that's not a problem. You don't have to say yes to everything, but you need to know why you're saying yes and why you're saying no to things. And that's the position that we're able to be in now.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think it's that rooting the ambition and the reality of where you're at, right? But still being ambitious, because I think sometimes people say, oh, well, we're not ready for that for 12 months, so we're just going to pause with everything. But what I love about the way you guys have approached that FA code is you've said, these are the areas where we can probably fast track even further beyond where they're benchmarking us, because we can see the gains there. And I think that's how people need to start thinking, and this is back to my point that I was saying at the beginning, that you need to see it as a change management program. No one would ever say, we just want to make that amount of profit that they say is the benchmark standard for our industry. You would always say, we want to go and set up an operation that's absolutely going to smash that. Or, you know, to go to Ollie's point, he would say, you know, if he heard what Frank Lampard's target was for where they were going to finish next season, naturally he would want to say, no, I believe that my squad and everything I'm doing, back to your confidence and ability, can do more because we've got a strategy and set up, because we're ambitious for ourselves and what we want to do.
Yeah, and that's it. It's a really good example. If it was a financial target, you're not going to say, oh, we've made the amount that we want. That's it now. Well, let's just stop work. We'll all go home. And it's the same for D9. It's, there are frameworks out there. We've achieved the Premier League quality standards advanced level over 12 months ago, and that's great. But for me, that was always it was never the ceiling. It was the, right, let's get that done. And then let's move on. What's the next thing? What's the next thing? What's the next thing? And that's the only way you can improve it. These frameworks are great. There's a number of frameworks out. We've got a fantastic partnership with Stonewall, which you know you want to talk about as well, and working really closely with them on how we operate as a business and more LGBT plus inclusive. That's fantastic. But what's great with that piece is that it applies to all strands of equality. So it works really well. So for me, we'll get to a point in the Stonewall partnership where we think, you know what, we've achieved everything that we want to achieve. That's fantastic. But what else can we do? Because I think that appetite is the only way we're going to make meaningful change and sort of really do that change management piece.
Yeah, no, it's a very good one. And the other thing, there's a couple of questions that have come up, and I think they'll fit quite well for the next section from Russ and Janine, which is all around how you found your feet. So if we move on to the next flight into this, so talking a little bit there about the changes that you started to see in the behavior. So back to that focus and the expectation. So it's quite a good way for us to go on. How did you manage that? Because I can imagine once you set out that ambition and where you've got to now, where you're always pushing, but when you started? How did you manage to get people rooted into that? Because Russ is asking that it feels like there's a huge amount always to do. So how did you choose where to focus your time and efforts to make the greatest impact?
For us, it was a lot of what is the right fit for us, and you can very quickly as an organisation, and as you start to delve into this work, understand that.
Yeah.
I would always be, if someone says, "Oh, we've got a strategy and it covers all 9 protected characteristics, and we're going to do 50 events a year," my opinion, it's not going to work because you're so diluted. You've got no real focus. Just because we focus on 4 protected characteristics at the moment doesn't mean that the other 5 aren't important. It means that these are the ones that we really need to progress in. These are the ones that we really need to do a lot of work, and then are really important to us, and also very relevant to us as well. So, for example, that hatred piece, those messages that come up there, they're real messages and posts that were targeted towards sort of football, discriminatory messages around football, and that's something that we've done a lot of work on, not just from a campaigning perspective, but also from a policy perspective, from a lobbying, working with the social media companies to do some fantastic stuff. And that's great because that's relevant to us.
Yeah.
However, if it wasn't relevant to us, we wouldn't have done it.
Yeah.
It might have been a great campaign and someone else might have done it and go, "Oh, that's a great piece of work." But unless it's relevant, unless it's genuine and authentic, it's hard to really delve into it. And that's where we have really found our feet.
Yeah.
The focus areas for us are really important. There is an expectation for Manchester United to always be the biggest and the best. And that's something that I thrive upon. From a business perspective, it's fantastic to have that, because as soon as I start saying to my senior leaders, they go, "What's your intention?" I was like, "Oh, to be the best organisation, not just in football, around equality." They're like, "Great, perfect, done." That's all I needed to hear, and that's fantastic. And then when we talk about the brand power, you've got this global football club, whereas you take out all the writing, you take out all the graphics, and you just show that shape with that badge, everyone knows what it is. And that's a great responsibility to have. With that comes a lot of pressure, but you know what, it's welcome pressure, and especially when you talk around D&I, it's a great thing to drive forward. And the nature of the sports industry that comes with that, everyone's watching, everyone's waiting to slip up, but you know what, if you're doing some good work, it'll really come through.
And a lot of people would also say that you were massively helped by the brand power that sits behind Man United as a football club. But in a similar way, I can also imagine that probably also in some ways posed some challenges. Do you want to talk through the pros of having a big, powerful brand like Man United to help you through versus some of the cons that can come with that? Because I think that'll be a reality for a lot of people. I can see the different organizations that have logged on will also be sitting in this space.
The pros are great. Got global brand, global reach, huge follower base, lots of news stories written about the club. That's fantastic, and sometimes that's great, sometimes it's not so great. The challenges that come with that is that there is an expectation to make sure that everything is perfect. And you know what? That's a great expectation to have, because it makes you work twice as hard. It makes you really take your time to make sure that something's right. And if we do something, we'll make sure that we do it the best way possible. It won't just be a half-hearted effort, like, "Oh yeah, we'll sign up to this, so yeah, that's fine, I'll tick a box, and we'll worry about it in 12 months' time." It's like, okay, if we're doing this, we're going big. We're going to do it properly, because that's exactly the approach it should be taken. Again, it's authentic, it's genuine, it works really well for us as a business. And I think for me personally, that's exactly the type of organisation that you want to be in. As a D&I lead, as a heading up the D&I function, you want to be in an organisation which, if you do something, you're going to do it right, you're going to follow it all the way through, and as you said, then you're going to blow it out the water and go bigger and better, because that's exactly where you want to be with everything.
Yeah, no, definitely. And there's somebody who's asked you a question here, Rishi, which I'm hoping you're going to answer affirmatively to pay it forward with your promise there to be bigger and better, which is Janine. And she's asked to say, do you insist with only working with recruitment partners who submit diverse shortlists? And do you ensure that the selection committee screening is also diverse?
Great question. And yes, we will. That's exactly the type of stuff that we're talking about when we talk about the leadership diversity code. It's those types of inclusive recruitment practices that are really going to lead to success in that. And I'm not, as part of this session, hold my hands up and saying we're the very best at what we're doing. I think anyone who is and says they've completed the quality is kidding themselves. I think there's always more that we can do. So some of those things, they're in the pipeline. Some of the things we're already doing, but there will always be something more for us to do.
Yeah, no, definitely. Well, Thank you for that. And you've got a compliment here, but also an interrogation, I guess, around that FA code, which is from Emma, which is saying, you know, great work by Manchester United and seeing what you can do. But obviously you guys have gone and taken ownership of driving that code forward. And she says, but can people actually trust? And I think it's quite a difficult question for you to answer, so I can understand why. Can people trust the FA when it comes to diversity and inclusion when you have senior leadership figures like Greg Clark going on TV and making, and I'm quoting here, stupid remarks?
You know what? The situation around Greg Clark, I think it's a fascinating one. There was obviously a number of comments that were made which upset a lot of people, rightly so. And I think the actions that were taken by the FA and by him to step away from his position, it's hard to argue against them. For me, to be honest, it doesn't really matter how the FA are driving their work forward, because it's very much around how my organisation is driving it forward. And that's why I was really pleased and proud that I wasn't the one to say we should do this leadership diversity code. It was actually our senior people who said we should be doing this. So then when I say we should actually adapt this to enhance our strategy, it's unanimous agreement. You go, well, yeah, of course we will. What question? You don't even need to ask it. Let's do it. So for me, yes, the leadership diversity code is something we've signed up to, and that's great. But for me, now it's Manchester United's leadership diversity code, and it's for us to drive it forward in the way that we need it to, and the way that, and that's how we've been able to enhance it with LGBT and disability and sit it across all recruitments, because not every single club is doing that, and that's fine. That's the way they operate. But for us, that's what's really going to cut through and make a difference.
No, definitely. And I think it's back to, to answer Russ's questions about your focus is where you have the most relevance and impact to your immediate community and employee base. So yeah, I'm conscious it's 17:27 and we said we would finish at 5:30. So what I would say to everyone is, please bear with us. We want to continue on the session with Rishi. So stay on, but if not, we are recording this and we will make sure that we send it on if you have to jump off. But there's a really worthwhile case study I think we want to dive into now and come back here. So yeah, so if we move on slides. So I want to talk to you about Stonewall. So obviously you guys, as you referenced there, you have the Rainbow Devils as a team, and you've signed up to a number of agreements and commitments with Stonewall, which a lot of other organizations will now be looking to do. They'll be looking to say they've identified those areas of focus and relevancy that they can impact in their internally and externally. And now you obviously did that, and then you landed in one of those key partners for you guys was Stonewall. So do you want to talk a little bit about how you've realized that longer, deeper term partnership with them?
So our history with Stonewall is quite extensive. It precedes my time at the club, so it was something I inherited. Our principal partner, Aon, the former CMO, has a fantastic relationship with a lot of our senior people.
Yeah.
He was the real driving force behind us getting more involved with Stonewall, and it's fantastic because that's exactly how a partnership should be. At a commercial level, you make each other better.
Yeah.
So we had a presence at a Stonewall conference, and it was like, you know what, it whet the appetite for our business. And then when I joined, it was like, okay, we're going to be a Team Pride member. And that was great because it was a coalition of organizations who were committed to LGBT inclusion in sport. And it was really good. It was a really strong statement for us to make and say, right, we're really going to focus on our LGBT plus inclusion efforts now. And that got us a lot of credit, but it also helped us really go, this will really help us hone in around our Pride network and the other stuff that we do to support Rainbow Laces and other couple of campaigns. Bring that forward to a couple of weeks ago, we were able to announce our strategic partnership with Stonewall, and this is where we're really getting the work done. So that partnership has a number of different elements as part of that agreement. Training, working towards equality frameworks around that, real sort of support. But the key thing is for me is that we've now integrated Stonewall as an organization into our business.
Yeah.
So,
have you done that? What are sort of the practical ways in which you've done that?
We're talking policy support, sharing a document, being like, how does this work? Reaffirming our language around how inclusive can we be? Yes, we already had gender neutral policies, and for someone who's looking at that, that's great. But it's also empowering us to have more discussions around pronoun uses. Do we put pronouns in our emails? Like a lot more and more people are doing. And why should we be proactive rather than reactive? How can we implement a transition at work policy? Because that's actually really important to have before someone comes to you when they say, I'm going through the transitioning process. Have the policy first, because that's exactly where you want to be. So to work with an organisation like Stonewall, who are held up as the experts in this field, is fantastic. But what makes it more special than others is that we can adapt those principles to the key strands of our strategy generally. So yes, they focus on LGBT, but they also have a huge focus on intersectionality within the LGBT community. We're talking about Black Pride, we're talking about International Women's Day. Can we feature more LGBT women as part of that? Can we actually mix it up a little bit and do it like that? And that's what makes them a really sort of special and a trusted partner to be able to do that. And the partnership itself has been fantastic to work on. There's such a good team. It comes with the challenges, the LGBT topics, they, for whatever reason, sometimes globally, they're seen as controversial. And that's a shame, but you know what, for me and for us, it only showed why we do it even more so. When you see these really negative comments, when you announce a partnership, not this one, but the first one back in 2017, when you see that, and we have discussions around it, oh, is it the right thing to do? Should we do it? Is it good? You know what? Yeah, because that's exactly why you do it. You do it to challenge those, and if you're steadfast and if you're strong and say, we know why we're doing this, this is why we're doing it, it's really important to us. That makes a difference, and it works really well.
Yeah, it's about finding that relevant purpose and that's authentic to what you're doing and what you're believing. And that's, again, rooted in the culture and the value system you've made around that, right? Because then it makes it easier. But there's a lot of, organizations that operate in global spaces like yourselves and are hugely popular in those countries where sadly there's still a lot of laws that are very discriminatory in their practice around LGBTQIA. How is that something you would love to address through a partnership with someone like Stonewall, to be able to use Man United's global pool to try and have some conversations and open things up? Or is that something that you leave outside?
We'll get there one day. I think the sports industry is maybe the way to make that happen. Because I think a lot of people, they tend to listen to their captain, their star player, their manager more than they do the politicians these days. And it's interesting, actually. It's a really interesting point. I think for us, we're a global organization, and when we do work with our partners who are from those territories, we tell them about the work. We don't hide it. We don't keep it a secret. We say, well, this is what we do. We're not asking you to go in and change your views. We're not asking you to change your laws or change the way you operate, but this is what we're all about. These are our values. This is all Red Equal. This is the partnership with Stonewall. And that's fine. It's a mutual understanding perspective, and I think it very much comes down to respect for people's values and how they operate and what operations they have and the values that they have as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think back to that global challenge piece, because a lot of organizations have that ambition to reach that level of recognition and scale. And there's also some really powerful things that you can also do through building platforms for your most visible people, like your players, right? To go out and be able to then bring around that change and help inspire how a nation thinks and leans into an issue. An example recently, that I had a really great discussion with a colleague of mine who's based in our Tokyo office is the level of cultural relevance and resonance that Naomi Osaka's activism this year has bred in Japan around racism, which is a country, and my colleague was explaining to me, where typically the belief and the sort of ideas around racism was that it didn't affect Japan because Japan majority is a monolithic in racial culture, but by them seeing someone they admired in Naomi Osaka and her having that platform with all her partners behind her to support her taking these stances, it actually has had a much bigger effect in terms of starting a conversation and getting people to be more cognizant of what that means.
And that's it. Take it back to the responsibility to make the world a better place. Notion. It's exactly the same. And the work that Naomi Osaka's done is unbelievable, fantastic, and she's literally changed the minds of a country. Not everyone, but some. So that's huge that she's taken that on and she's felt. And you see there are a number of other athletes, both inside and outside of football, who have taken on that mantle to challenge, and they must get a fair bit of criticism. Maybe from those closest to them as well. But you know what? They're steadfast in their beliefs, and that's really empowering to see. It's exactly why, for me, it makes me think, you know what, you're on the right track. If your messages are the same as someone like that, who potentially is sacrificing everything, partners, sponsors, family ties, reception when they go back home, etc., political issues, you're doing something right.
Yeah, no, definitely agreed. And on that subject of sort of those visible role models that kind of get you thinking and feeling, so let's say rooted in your conviction to see a purpose through, even if it gets difficult. You've got a question here to ask, as somebody who's working in a really sort of inspirational field of work. Do you take inspiration from any other leaders in other sectors around the world to help inform some of the work you're doing to keep partnerships like Stonewall front and center despite their difficulty in getting them globally operational?
You know what? There's always, I'll never stand here and say, oh yeah, I'm pretty well versed in the topic. There is always something that you can learn from someone else, whether that's an author, whether it's Lewis Hamilton, whether it's a Marcus Rashford. Someone is always doing something amazing, and it's great to be able to point to those people and say, oh, look at the fantastic work that they're doing. This year has been brilliant for that, and for all the trauma and all the issues that have happened. It's really moved a lot of sort of really good campaigners and advocates and activists into the light, exactly where they should have been. So it's been great to follow them and just understand a little bit more about the challenges that people have globally, whether that's someone who works in the local community on the other corner of the globe doing some fantastic work, or whether that's a global superstar like a Lewis Hamilton who does some amazing stuff week in in his industry. So yeah, it's really empowering just to sort of see the amount of people who this year more than any have really taken that on the shoulders and thought, you know what, I'm going to do more. And the people on the journey alongside them as well, which is the important part. It shouldn't just be down to that one person from the underrepresented group, and it should be down to maybe that person kicks things off, but the people around them have a responsibility to lift them up onto the shoulders and drive them forward to do even more.
Yeah, no, definitely. I hope that answers your question, Andrew. Do you want me to press Rishi for a name? Say yes or no in the chat box, because he gave quite a Miss Universe answer there, which was great, don't get me wrong, but I think people maybe want to understand a little bit more about, like, who do you look to for inspiration maybe this year, who has come to the fore that maybe you were unaware of working in this space that you've thought, yeah, I can lean into that and I feel like I've got a good sort of ally there or North Star.
You know what, that's a tough question. There are a lot. You know, one thing I've really done this year is read more.
Yeah, okay, great.
Really read more and try and understand about what's going on outside of football, because I think this industry, majority of people on this call, is sports related. Our industries are very unique in the way that they operate, and very time consuming. So for me, I've tried to do that a lot more. There's some fantastic sort of authors that I've learned from. Rennie Lodge, that book about how to talk about
why I'm no longer talking to white people about race.
Things like that have really made me think a little bit more differently in the way that I do things. There's another fantastic book which is around gender, Caroline Criado, which is called Invisible Women.
Yeah, great book. Yeah,
brilliant as it is. But it says if you're going to press me on sort of a figurehead, someone who really drives it forward, without being too political, you've got like Barack Obama, what he's done, and the way he's done it with pure class and integrity. That's something to aspire to. That's someone who, in my opinion, my personal opinion, has done things in the right way, has been on the journey, has been someone who has driven change forward, not just in his country, but then has continued to do that and taken that responsibility in probably the most testing times for him personally, professionally, that he's ever been through. So yeah, that's probably someone that I look up to and sort of think about what are they doing and what activism are they doing in their space.
Yeah, no, brilliant. No, I definitely agree with that. I'm currently reading A Promised Land, and I would highly recommend people to go into that charts his presidential journey. But yeah, so thank you so much, Rishi. I think we're going to wrap things up and open to the floor to see if there are any questions. Janine has asked for a list of the books you're reading, Rishi, so we will add that to this deck here that will circulate so that you can get a deeper dive to see what he's been reading and learning. And you have to be honest, Rishi, we want everything, including any Mills and Boons, if you've happened to be reading them as well.
Right.
Brilliant. Great. So yeah, so I guess we'll move on now. I think now when we look at how it's going for you, really, it's about setting the standard, right? And pushing and moving on. And so I want to use that segue as sort of to invite some questions now from anyone who hasn't had a chance, or maybe there were some that were emailed in, because I know people were asked to also submit them pre-event. So does anyone have any questions they want to answer that they ask that they either submitted ahead or not? Tom and Stuart, I don't know if you're there and can help with that. No? Yes, maybe.
I can ask one if no one else has one. I feel a bit guilty as I've had a question already.
Amazing.
So,
you have more than one, Russ. It's absolutely fine. You're with friends. You'll have more than one.
Thank you. So my question goes back to influencing governing bodies, I suppose. And so my business is a part of horse racing, and we've set up an inclusive horse racing club, and the governing bodies, so the BHA, are doing kind of, I'd say, level 1 work to start bringing the idea of diversity and inclusion to a relatively unreceptive audience. And I'm trying to gently encourage them to engage more with smaller organizations like ours. And I wondered if you had a perspective, Rishi, on being able to influence and guide the governing body, knowing that, you know, we're a small fish in a huge pond, whereas you're probably a large fish in an average sized pond. So the scale is quite different. But any advice or suggestions would be gratefully received.
Yeah, it's a great question. Thanks, Russell. It's tough, isn't it? Especially, I've been in that position where representing a small organisation, which sometimes it's easier to sort of push away a little bit and do it. And you know what? Other than saying stick with it and keep on fighting it, it's really hard to answer that question, to say this is exactly what you need to do, because there isn't an answer which I can go, if you do this, you'll get where you want to. I think what I would say is there is a lot of power to be had with collaborating with other organisations and working with them, and there's a power in sort of working with other organisations, other people, other influences, and having a collective approach, because you'll find that if you can build a growing group of people who are all pushing on the door, pushing together, you'll get through it, and you'll force those organisations to listen and sort of make meaningful change. And I think it's really hard because, talking more hypothetically, sometimes bigger organisations only really take this topic seriously when something goes wrong, and that's not the position that you want to be in. You want to be in a position where you see the benefits rather than oh crap, we've got loads of consequences, we need to do something about it. So yes, that's how probably the best way that I can answer that question is solidarity in numbers. Get the people supported, whether they're within your industry, whether they're not within your industry. There's a lot of value to sort of get non-industry people to support what you're doing. Just maybe have a conversation with someone to get connected to them, and if you can leverage one person and get them on your side, then hopefully that's what will make a difference.
That's great. All right. Any more? Are we good and ready to go and have a nice aperitivo of some description? I know I am now, and I'm soaking more of that knowledge. And yeah. So yeah, oh, we've got one from Andrew. Are you looking for that name?
No, I'm not looking for that name. But I'm thinking back to your earlier career, and I'm thinking about the volunteering work that you've done with Liverpool and in the community. And I'm thinking, when you were actually going out and pushing that diversity work and the work that you were doing with them, how important was that in getting the brand out there in terms of Liverpool, and how much of that work is still important now at Manchester United? Because I'm thinking about where I work, and I'm thinking about the school that I work at, and I'm thinking that we do a lot of outreach work in itself, and we are probably the biggest brand name in terms of education, but we have a reputation. And on the ground, how important was that work that that you were doing with Liverpool, and you know the work that you might be doing with Manchester United now as well?
So first things first, Andrew, always nice to hear familiar accents.
Yeah.
And things like this. I need to make sure I tone down the Scouse now that I'm answering your question. You know what, that reputation thing is really important. It is, there's no doubt about it, because that's credit in your community, essentially. It's not, for me, it's not the reason why you do it. It's definitely not the reason you do D&I work in your communities, in a foundation level. You know this with what you do and what you talked about. Do it because it's the right thing to do, but there is no denying that it does buy you credit in there. Hopefully you never really need to take that credit, because that means you're doing something right and you're building upon it. I suppose at Manchester United now, I probably don't see it that much as a credit thing. I see it as we do this because it needs to be done. and because we have a responsibility to do it. So even if we weren't getting the pats on the back, even if we weren't getting the external recognition, even if we were being held up as leaders in terms of what we do, we'd still do it, because the world that we're in now, it needs people to do it. It needs organizations to lead it forward. So whether that's on a community scale, whether that's as a global football club, if we're all pulling the same direction and we're all making those, whether it's a small nudge or whether it's a huge nudge, if we're pulling that same direction, we're making a difference. And I think for me, that's the really important piece and the really important takeaway.
Thank you very much.
We'll call it a wrap now. I want to thank you once again, Rishi, for letting us have a real deep dive into seeing the mechanics of how you've set out on a really inspiring and very empowering journey at Manchester United. And we wish you all the best in your role, and long live your Liverpool love. And hopefully you can get to continue to inspire Man United on one hand, but keep getting Clough to collecting as many trophies as possible as well.
Fantastic. Thank you, Liseli, and thank you for having me as well. I really enjoyed the session.
No, absolute pleasure. And big thanks to Tom Sears, who I'm going to hand over now, who's the founder of the PBSL, who put us all together tonight. So thank you to all of you for joining us. It's been really great, and loved all the questions and engagement.
Liseli, thank you very much. Rishi, absolutely fantastic. Real eye-opener and really encouraging to see the work that you're doing at Manchester United, and long may it continue. For those of you who enjoyed tonight's session, Rishi and Liseli will be back at some point in the new year, and at the PBSL we'll be doing a deeper dive into some of the issues that we've examined this evening. So have a look at the website. If you're not a member, sign up and join us to try and make a difference in this key area in the sports industry. Our next session is next week, focusing on the digital world. So check out the website for that. In the meantime, have a great evening and thank you very much.